My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. Today, I'm going to tell you about the day my own granddaughter laughed at me in front of her entire school, calling me the embarrassing old lady with the dirty apron, while her friends recorded it all on their phones. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, is that I own every single building in that school district, including the very ground they were standing on. It was parent-teacher conference day, and I had rushed straight from my volunteer work at the community kitchen to pick up Emma, my 17-year-old granddaughter. I'd been raising her since she was 8, after my daughter died in that terrible car accident. Emma was everything to me. My world, my reason for getting up every morning, my second chance at motherhood. I wore my simple floral apron because I'd been serving meals to homeless families all morning, something I'd done every week for the past 15 years. As I walked through those school gates, searching for Emma among the crowd of teenagers, I felt proud. Proud of the young woman she'd become. Proud of the sacrifices I'd made to give her the best education money could buy. I'd worked 3 jobs when she was younger, saved every penny, denied myself countless luxuries just to ensure she had everything she needed. Private tutors, dance lessons, the finest clothes, the latest technology. Nothing was too good for my Emma. But then I saw her face when she spotted me, that look of pure disgust, as if I were something shameful she needed to hide. She was standing with a group of her wealthy classmates, girls whose parents drove luxury cars and wore designer clothes to school events. And there I was, in my worn but clean dress and my volunteer apron, looking exactly like what I was, a grandmother who had just spent her morning serving food to people who had nothing. "Oh my God, is that your grandmother?" one of the girls whispered, loud enough for me to hear. Emma's face turned red, not with embarrassment for their rudeness, but with shame. Shame of me. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her, who had loved her unconditionally, who had been both mother and father to her for nearly a decade. What happened next broke something inside me that I'm not sure will ever heal completely. Emma looked directly at me, then turned to her friends and said, "I don't know why she insists on embarrassing me like this. Look at that dirty apron. She probably smells like the soup kitchen." The girls erupted in laughter, their phones immediately coming out to record what they clearly thought was hilarious content for their social media. But Emma wasn't finished. As I stood there, frozen in shock and pain, she continued, "Honestly, I wish she'd just stay home. It's so embarrassing having a grandmother who looks like, well, like that. My friends' grandmothers are elegant and sophisticated. Mine looks like she belongs in the kitchen serving poor people." More laughter, more phones recording, more pieces of my heart shattering with each cruel word. I had raised this child with nothing but love, patience, and devotion. I had held her when she cried for her mother, helped her with homework until midnight, celebrated every small victory, and comforted her through every disappointment. I had given up my social life, my hobbies, my own dreams, to make sure she had everything she needed to succeed. And this was how she repaid me, with public humiliation and cruelty that cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. Let me tell you who I really am, because Emma clearly forgot somewhere along the way. I wasn't always the woman in the simple dress and volunteer apron. I was Margaret Thornfield, and 40 years ago, I was one of the most successful businesswomen in this entire state. I built my empire from nothing, starting with a small diner that I opened with my late husband Robert when we were barely 25 years old. Robert and I, we had dreams bigger than our small town could contain. We worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week, turning that little diner into the most popular restaurant in the county. But I had vision beyond just serving good food. I saw potential everywhere. Empty lots that could become shopping centers, old buildings that could be renovated into profitable businesses, land that everyone else overlooked, but I knew would become valuable. By the time I was 40, I owned 12 restaurants, 3 shopping plazas, and had invested in real estate across 4 counties. By 50, my portfolio included office buildings, apartment complexes, and commercial properties that generated more income in a month than most people see in a lifetime. I was featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at business conferences, and consulted by city planners about development projects. But success meant nothing without family to share it with. When my daughter, Sarah, was born, I made a conscious decision to step back from the spotlight. I hired the best managers money could buy, created systems that allowed my businesses to run smoothly without my constant presence, and focused on being the mother I wanted to be. I attended every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. I was there for bedtime stories and homework help, for scraped knees and broken hearts. When Sarah grew up and had Emma, I was overjoyed to become a grandmother. I spoiled that little girl from the moment she was born, buying her the most beautiful clothes, the finest toys, setting up trust funds for her education and future. I taught her to bake cookies in my kitchen, read her stories about strong women who built empires, showed her that with hard work and determination, anything was possible. Then came that terrible night when Sarah and her husband were killed by a drunk driver. Emma was only 8 years old, traumatized and lost, and suddenly I found myself not just a grandmother, but a mother again at 64. I didn't hesitate for a second. I opened my home and my heart completely to this broken little girl who needed me more than anyone had ever needed me before. I made another conscious choice then, to live more simply, to focus entirely on giving Emma the love and stability she needed to heal. I moved us to a modest house in a good neighborhood, enrolled her in the best private school, and dedicated myself completely to her well-being. I volunteered at her school, drove her to every activity, helped with every project. I wanted her to feel normal again, to know that she was loved and safe, and that nothing would ever hurt her while I was there to protect her. The volunteer work at the community kitchen started as a way to teach Emma about gratitude and giving back. I wanted her to understand that we were blessed, that with blessing comes responsibility to help others. For years, she came with me, and we worked side by side, serving meals to families who were struggling. She seemed to understand then, seemed proud of the work we were doing together. But somewhere along the way, as Emma grew older and started spending more time with her wealthy classmates, something changed. The simple life I'd chosen to give her stability began to embarrass her. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her became someone she wanted to hide from her friends. The changes started so gradually that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. Emma was 14 when I first noticed the subtle shifts in her behavior, the small signs that the granddaughter I'd raised with such love and care was becoming someone I barely recognized. It began with her friends. Emma had always been popular, but when she started high school at the prestigious Westfield Academy, she fell in with a group of girls whose families were among the wealthiest in the state. These weren't just comfortable, well-off families. These were people with generational wealth, old money, the kind of families who had country club memberships passed down through generations and vacation homes in the Hamptons. At first, I was happy for her. Emma deserved good friends, and I wanted her to feel like she belonged. I increased her allowance, bought her the designer clothes and accessories she said she needed to fit in, made sure she had everything her new friends had. When she asked for a more expensive phone, I got it for her. When she wanted to join the exclusive writing club, I paid the membership fees without question. I thought I was helping her build confidence and friendships. But then came the first comment that made my heart skip a beat. We were driving home from school, and Emma was telling me about her friend Madison's mother, who was apparently some sort of socialite who organized charity galas and sat on museum boards. Madison's mom is so elegant, Emma said, and there was something in her tone that made me glance at her in the rearview mirror. She always looks so put together, you know? Like a real lady. A real lady. The implication hung in the air between us, unspoken but clear. Unlike me, with my simple clothes and practical approach to life, I tried to brush it off, telling myself that Emma was just admiring someone new, that it didn't mean anything about how she saw me. But the comments continued, growing more pointed over time. When I picked her up from school wearing my comfortable walking shoes instead of heels, she'd sigh and ask why I couldn't dress up a little. When her friends came over and saw me in the kitchen preparing homemade meals instead of ordering catered food like their families did, I'd catch her looking embarrassed, making excuses about how I liked to cook. The volunteer work became a particular source of tension. Emma stopped coming with me to the community kitchen, claiming she was too busy with schoolwork and social activities. When I'd mention my volunteer schedule, she'd change the subject quickly, especially if her friends were around. Once, I overheard her on the phone telling someone that I was really into charity work, and the way she said it made it sound like an embarrassing hobby rather than something meaningful. The most painful moments were the small rejections that accumulated like paper cuts. When I'd offer to help with her homework, She'd say she preferred to work alone. When I'd suggest we spend time together on weekends, she'd have plans with friends. When I'd try to share stories about my day or ask about hers, she'd give me one-word answers while scrolling through her phone. I started noticing how differently she behaved when her wealthy friends were around versus when we were alone. With them, she'd adopt a slightly different accent, use vocabulary she'd never used at home, and present herself as someone more sophisticated than the girl I'd raised. She'd talk about places she'd never been and experiences she'd never had, creating a version of herself that fit better with their world. The breaking point of this phase came during her 16th birthday party. I had planned a beautiful celebration at our home, with homemade decorations and a cake I'd spent hours perfecting. But when her friends arrived and saw the modest setup compared to the elaborate parties they were used to, I watched Emma's face fall. She spent the entire evening apologizing for things that shouldn't have needed apologies. Our comfortable but not luxurious home, the homemade food instead of catered cuisine, the fact that we didn't have staff serving the guests. That night, after everyone had gone home, Emma looked at me with a mixture of frustration and something that looked almost like pity. "Grandma," she said, "I know you're trying, but maybe next time we could just have the party at a restaurant or something. You know, somewhere more appropriate." Appropriate. The word hit me like a physical blow. Nothing about the life I'd built for us, the love I'd poured into every detail of her upbringing, was appropriate for the image she wanted to project to her friends. By Emma's junior year, the subtle embarrassment had evolved into something much crueler and more deliberate. The girl who used to curl up next to me on the couch for movie nights now treated me like an inconvenience she had to endure, and worse, like a secret she needed to keep from the people who mattered to her. The humiliation became public and calculated. When her friends would come to pick her up, Emma would rush out to meet them at the curb, clearly hoping to avoid any interaction between them and me. If I happened to be in the front yard or coming home from errands, she'd barely acknowledge me, offering quick, embarrassed waves while hurrying her friends along. But it was the lies that hurt the most. I discovered Emma had been creating an entirely fictional version of our life to share with her classmates. According to the stories she told, we lived in a much larger house in the most exclusive part of town. She claimed I was semi-retired from business, rather than admitting I spent my time volunteering. She even invented a housekeeper and a gardener, explaining away the fact that I did my own cooking and yard work. The worst part was discovering that she was ashamed of my volunteer work, the very thing I was most proud of, the way I tried to give back to the community and teach her about compassion. When one of her teachers mentioned seeing me at the community kitchen during a parent conference, Emma's face went white with mortification. Later, she confronted me at home with an anger I'd never seen from her before. "Why do you have to volunteer at that place?" she demanded. "Do you know how embarrassing it is when people see you there? Madison's mom does charity work too, but she organizes fancy fundraising dinners and galas. She doesn't actually serve food to homeless people like some kind of cafeteria worker." Cafeteria worker. She said it like it was the most shameful profession imaginable, completely dismissing the dignity of honest work and the importance of directly helping people in need. This from a girl I'd raised to value kindness and service above material possessions. The social exclusion became more obvious and painful. Emma stopped inviting me to school events where other parents would be present. When she made honor roll, she didn't want me at the ceremony. When she was in the school play, she gave me tickets for a different night than when her friends' families would be attending. She was systematically erasing me from the parts of her life that mattered to her. The comments became more direct and cutting. "Grandma, could you maybe not wear that apron when you pick me up?" she'd ask, as if my volunteer work was something shameful to hide. "And maybe you could park around the corner instead of right in front of the school?" She wanted me invisible, present enough to provide for her needs, but hidden from anyone whose opinion she valued. Money became another source of tension, but not in the way you might expect. Emma had no idea about my real financial situation. I'd been careful to live modestly and never flaunt wealth, but she'd started making comments about how we're not like my friends' families and how we can't afford the things they have. She'd grown resentful of what she perceived as our lower economic status, not knowing that I could have bought and sold most of her friends' families several times over. The cruelest moment came during her senior year college preparation. Emma had been accepted to several prestigious universities, and I was so proud of her achievements. I'd been quietly paying for the best SAT prep courses, college counseling, and application assistance. But when it came time for the parent information sessions, she asked me not to come. "It's just that all the other parents are going to be there," she explained, not meeting my eyes. "Important people, you know. Doctors and lawyers and business executives. I just think it might be better if you stayed home this time." Important people. After everything I'd done for her, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the love I'd poured into raising her, I wasn't important enough to be seen with her at a college information session. I was good enough to pay the bills and provide the support, but not good enough to be acknowledged as the woman who'd made her success possible. That night, I lay awake thinking about the little girl who used to tell everyone proudly that her grandma was the smartest, strongest woman in the world. Where had that child gone? When had love turned to shame and pride turned to embarrassment? The final breaking point came just 3 weeks after that humiliating scene at the school. Emma had been accepted to Harvard with a full scholarship, a scholarship I'd quietly arranged through my connections and donations to the university, though she had no idea. She was planning a celebration party, and I was so excited to finally have something we could be proud of together. But when I asked about helping with the party planning, Emma's response shattered what was left of my heart. "Actually, Grandma, I've been thinking, maybe it would be better if you weren't at the party at all. I mean, all my friends' parents are going to be there, and they're all successful professionals and business people. You're just, different. The word hung in the air like a death sentence for our relationship. I wasn't just embarrassing anymore. I was so far beneath her social aspirations that she didn't want me present for one of the most important celebrations of her life, but she wasn't finished destroying me yet. And honestly," she continued, not even looking at me as she spoke, "I think it's time we talked about my living arrangements for the summer before college. Madison's family has offered to let me stay with them. They have connections that could help me get internships, and I'd be around people who could actually help my future instead of holding me back." Holding her back. The woman who had raised her, sacrificed for her, loved her unconditionally for nearly a decade was now holding her back. I felt something inside me break completely, not just my heart, but something deeper. My faith in the power of love, my belief that kindness and devotion would always be returned, my trust that the child I'd poured my soul into raising would never completely abandon the woman who'd given her everything. "I see," I said quietly, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "And what about after college? I suppose you'll be too busy with your important friends to visit your embarrassing grandmother then, too?" Emma had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but her answer was swift and brutal. "I think we both know I'm going to have a different kind of life than this," she said, gesturing around our comfortable home with obvious disdain. "I'll be living in New York or Los Angeles, working with successful people, building a real career. This whole simple life thing, it's just not who I am anymore." That night, after Emma had gone to her room to video chat with her friends about party planning I wasn't invited to participate in, I sat in my kitchen and made a decision that would change everything. I'd spent 9 years trying to give this child a normal, humble upbringing, teaching her values I thought were important. I'd hidden my wealth and success because I wanted her to appreciate simple pleasures and understand the value of hard work. But Emma had made it clear that she was ashamed of everything I represented, my values, my choices, my very existence in her life. She wanted to be part of a world that valued money and status above character and kindness. She thought she was too good for the woman who'd raised her, too sophisticated for the life I'd provided. Well, if Emma wanted to see what real wealth and power looked like, if she thought she was ready to play in the big leagues with people who had real money and influence, then it was time she learned exactly who her embarrassing grandmother really was. I walked to my home office and opened the safe where I kept my most important documents. Financial statements showing assets worth over $200 million, property deeds for commercial buildings across 4 states, stock certificates, and investment portfolios that generated more passive income in a month than most people earned in a year. And most importantly, the documents that would show Emma exactly how much power her simple grandmother actually wielded in this community. It was time for my granddaughter to learn that the woman she was so ashamed of owned the very ground she walked on, including every building in her precious school district, the shopping centers where she and her friends spent their time, and even the country club where her wealthy friends' families held their memberships. Emma wanted to see what happened when you bit the hand that fed you. She was about to find out. What Emma didn't know, what none of them knew, is that I'd been preparing for this moment for years. Not because I expected such cruelty from my own granddaughter, but because a lifetime in business had taught me to always have contingency plans. I'd built my empire by thinking 10 steps ahead, and even in my personal life, I'd learned to protect myself from those who might take advantage of my generosity. 3 years ago, when Emma first started showing signs of embarrassment about our simple lifestyle, I'd quietly begun restructuring my assets, not out of spite, but out of wisdom gained from decades of watching people's true characters emerge when money and status were involved. I'd seen too many families destroyed by greed, too many relationships poisoned by entitlement, to leave everything to chance. The first thing I'd done was establish the Thornfield Foundation, a charitable organization that would inherit the majority of my wealth upon my death. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide scholarships and support to children from working-class families who showed both academic promise and genuine character. Children who understood the value of hard work and treated others with respect, regardless of their social status. But that was just the beginning. I'd also quietly transferred ownership of several key properties into the foundation's name, including the very shopping center where Emma and her friends spent their weekends, the office building that housed the law firm representing Madison's family, and most importantly, the land lease agreements for Westfield Academy itself, the school that Emma was so proud to attend, where she felt so superior to her embarrassing grandmother, was actually sitting on property I owned. The beauty of my plan was in its subtlety. I'd structured everything through a complex web of trusts and holding companies, managed by a team of lawyers and financial advisors who'd been with me for decades. To anyone looking from the outside, Margaret Thornfield appeared to be exactly what Emma thought she was: a simple woman living modestly on what seemed like a comfortable but unremarkable retirement income. But the reality was far different. Every month, rental income from my commercial properties flowed into accounts Emma had never heard of. Dividend payments from my stock portfolio accumulated in investment funds she didn't know existed. The modest house we lived in was actually just one of 7 properties I owned, chosen specifically because I wanted Emma to grow up with normal expectations and values. I'd even been more generous than Emma realized in ways she'd never discover. Her full scholarship to Harvard? That wasn't just based on her academic merit. I'd been a major donor to the university for over 15 years, contributing to scholarship funds and building projects. When Emma's application came across the admissions committee's desk, it carried the weight of my financial support, though she'd never know it. The private tutors, the SAT prep courses, the college counseling, all of it had been arranged through my network of contacts and paid for through accounts Emma had no knowledge of. The riding lessons she'd enjoyed, the designer clothes she'd insisted she needed, the expensive electronics and gadgets, everything had been funded by the empire I'd built while she was learning to walk and talk. But perhaps the most important part of my plan was what I discovered about Emma's precious social circle. Madison's family, the ones Emma admired so much for their apparent wealth and sophistication, they were actually drowning in debt, maintaining their lifestyle through credit and loans secured against properties they were struggling to keep. The country club membership Emma envied? It was 3 months behind on payments. And the law firm that represented several of her friends' families? They were my tenants, renting space in a building I'd owned for 12 years. The elegant restaurant where Emma's social group held their exclusive gatherings? I owned that too, along with the entire block it sat on. Emma thought she was moving in circles of power and influence, but she had no idea that her embarrassing grandmother was actually the puppet master behind much of what she admired. The very people she wanted to impress were dependent on my business empire for their livelihoods, though they had no idea who their ultimate landlord really was. I'd spent years watching Emma become someone I barely recognized, hoping that maturity would bring back the kind, grateful child I'd raised. I'd given her every opportunity to remember her values, to appreciate what we had together, to show some respect for the woman who'd sacrificed everything for her happiness. But Emma had made her choice. She'd chosen status over substance, appearance over authenticity, and cruelty over kindness. She wanted to be part of a world that valued only money and power. Well, she was about to learn exactly how that world really worked, and who actually held the power she thought she was so desperate to access. The irony was perfect, and the justice was poetic. Emma was about to discover that the woman she'd spent years being ashamed of was actually the most powerful person in her entire social universe. The weeks following Emma's cruel declaration that I was holding her back were perhaps the most painful of my entire life, but also the most illuminating. I watched my granddaughter move through her final months of high school with a confidence that was both heartbreaking and infuriating, completely unaware that her entire world was built on foundations I controlled. Emma threw herself into her social life with renewed vigor, as if cutting ties with me had freed her to become the person she'd always wanted to be. She spent most of her time at Madison's house, coming home only to sleep and change clothes. When she was home, she treated me like hired help, polite but distant, asking for money for various activities, but offering no conversation, no warmth, no acknowledgement of our years together. The most painful moments were when her friends would come to the house. I'd hear them in the living room, talking about their plans for college, their summer internships, their bright futures. Emma would speak about her Harvard acceptance as if it were entirely her own achievement, never mentioning the years of support, encouragement, and sacrifice that had made it possible. She'd even started referring to me as my grandmother's caretaker when friends asked who I was, as if I were some employee rather than the woman who'd raised her. But I endured it all in silence, watching and waiting. Because while Emma was busy reinventing herself and distancing herself from me, I was quietly putting the final pieces of my plan into place. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every moment of public embarrassment only strengthened my resolve to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. The community kitchen became my refuge during this time. There, surrounded by people who genuinely appreciated my help, I found the strength to continue. The families I served there understood gratitude in ways Emma had forgotten. They thanked me for every meal, every kind word, every moment of dignity I helped provide. Their children looked at me with respect and appreciation, calling me Miss Margaret, and always offering to help with cleanup. It was there, among people who had so little but gave so much love in return, that I realized how far Emma had fallen from the values I'd tried to instill in her. These families, struggling to make ends meet, treated each other and everyone around them with more kindness and respect than my privileged granddaughter had shown me in months. Meanwhile, Emma's social circle continued their oblivious march toward graduation, completely unaware of the financial house of cards many of their families were living in. I watched Madison's mother post photos of expensive vacations on social media, not knowing that I'd received notice that their country club membership was being terminated for non-payment. I saw Emma's friend Jessica bragging about her father's successful law practice, while my property management company was preparing eviction notices for their office space. The most ironic moments came when Emma would complain about money, not because we didn't have enough, but because she thought we didn't have enough compared to her friends. "I wish we could afford a nicer car," she'd say, not knowing that I owned a collection of luxury vehicles stored in a private garage across town. "I wish we lived in a better neighborhood," she'd sigh, unaware that I owned properties in the most exclusive areas of 3 different cities. But perhaps the cruelest irony was watching Emma stress about her college expenses. She'd started talking about taking out student loans, getting a part-time job, maybe even choosing a less expensive school. All of this while sitting in a house owned by a woman who could have paid for her entire education with the interest earned on her investments in a single month. I could have ended her worry with a single conversation, could have revealed the truth about our financial situation and eliminated all her concerns about money. But Emma had made it clear that she was ashamed of who I was and what I represented. She wanted to make her own way in the world, to distance herself from the simple life I'd provided. So I let her believe that she was on her own, that the future she was so excited about would have to be built without any help from her embarrassing grandmother. The final weeks before graduation were the hardest. Emma was so focused on her new life, so excited about escaping what she saw as the limitations of our relationship, that she barely acknowledged my presence. She made plans for graduation day that didn't include me, arranged her celebration party without my input, and spoke about her future as if I wouldn't be part of it. But I knew something Emma didn't. I knew that very soon, Her carefully constructed new world was going to come crashing down around her, and the woman she'd been so eager to leave behind was going to be revealed as the architect of everything she'd thought she wanted to escape. Graduation day arrived with perfect spring weather, and Emma left the house early that morning without saying goodbye. She'd arranged to get ready at Madison's house, to arrive at the ceremony with her real family, the people she felt actually mattered in her life. I wasn't invited to the pre-ceremony gathering, wasn't included in the dinner plans, wasn't even told where I should sit during the actual graduation. But I had my own plans for that day, plans that had been months in the making. At exactly 10 a.m., while Emma was getting her hair done at Madison's house, my team of lawyers began executing what I'd come to think of as the revelation. It was time for my granddaughter and her social circle to learn exactly who they'd been dealing with all these years. The first domino fell at Madison's house. As Emma was having her makeup done, Madison's mother received a call from their country club. Their membership had been officially terminated, and they had 24 hours to remove their personal belongings from their locker. The call was followed immediately by a visit from a process server, delivering foreclosure notices on their home. The family that Emma had held up as the epitome of success and sophistication was about to lose everything, but that was just the beginning. At 10:30, Jessica's father received an eviction notice for his law office, along with a letter explaining that the building had been sold and all current leases were being terminated. The successful practice that Emma had admired so much was about to be homeless, and Jessica's father had no idea that his new landlord was the woman his daughter's friend had been publicly humiliating for months. By 11 a.m., 3 more families in Emma's social circle had received similar notices. The restaurant where they held their exclusive gatherings closed for renovations that would last indefinitely. The shopping center where they spent their weekends, under new management with strict new policies about loitering and inappropriate behavior. But the biggest shock was yet to come. At noon, exactly 1 hour before the graduation ceremony was scheduled to begin, Emma received a call that would change everything. It was from Harvard University's financial aid office, informing her that there had been an administrative error regarding her scholarship. The funding that was supposed to cover her tuition had been withdrawn by the donor, effective immediately. I watched from my car in the school parking lot as Emma stumbled out of Madison's house, her face white with shock, her carefully applied makeup already streaking down her cheeks. She was frantically calling the university, trying to understand what had happened, begging them to reconsider. But there was nothing to reconsider. The Margaret Thornfield Scholarship Fund, yes, named after me, though Emma had never bothered to read the fine print, had specific requirements about character and gratitude that Emma no longer met. The graduation ceremony itself was a disaster for Emma's social group. Half of her friends' families didn't attend because they were dealing with their own financial emergencies. Those who did come sat in stunned silence, whispering about the sudden reversals of fortune that seemed to be hitting everyone at once. But the final revelation was still to come. After the ceremony, as Emma stood alone in the parking lot, her friends scattered to deal with their family's crises, I finally approached her. She looked at me with a mixture of desperation and resentment, as if somehow all of this was my fault. "Grandma," she said, her voice breaking, "something terrible is happening. Harvard took away my scholarship, and all my friends' families are having financial problems. I don't understand what's going on." I looked at my granddaughter, this young woman I'd raised with such love and hope, and felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. "Emma," I said quietly, "there's something you need to know about your embarrassing grandmother." I handed her a folder I'd been carrying, filled with documents that would explain everything. Property deeds, showing my ownership of virtually every building in her social universe. Financial statements revealing the true extent of my wealth. And most importantly, the paperwork showing that the Margaret Thornfield Scholarship Fund, the fund that had been paying for her Harvard education, required recipients to demonstrate not just academic excellence, but also character, gratitude, and respect for others. Emma's hands shook as she read through the documents, her face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. "You own all of this?" she whispered. You're rich?" "I'm not just rich, Emma," I replied. "I'm the woman you've been ashamed of for the past 3 years. I'm the embarrassing grandmother who serves food to homeless people. I'm also the person who owns the ground you're standing on, the school you just graduated from, and the scholarship fund that was going to pay for your college education." The look on Emma's face was something I'll never forget, a mixture of shock, shame, and desperate calculation as she realized the magnitude of what she'd lost through her own cruelty and ingratitude. The weeks that followed what I came to think of as the reckoning were both satisfying and heartbreaking in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Emma's entire social world collapsed like a house of cards, and watching her navigate the aftermath taught me more about her character than 9 years of raising her had revealed. At first, there was denial. Emma convinced herself that this was all some terrible mistake, that surely her loving grandmother wouldn't deliberately destroy her future over a few thoughtless comments. She came home that night after graduation, her designer dress wrinkled and her makeup long since cried away, and tried to pretend that everything could go back to normal. "Grandma," she said, using the sweet voice she hadn't employed with me in years, "I know we've had some misunderstandings lately, but we can work this out, right? I mean, you wouldn't really let me lose my Harvard scholarship over some silly teenage behavior, would you?" Silly teenage behavior. Even then, facing the complete destruction of everything she'd thought she wanted, Emma couldn't bring herself to acknowledge the depth of her cruelty or take real responsibility for her actions. She still saw her years of public humiliation, her deliberate exclusion of me from important events, her systematic campaign to erase me from her life, as nothing more than minor social awkwardness. When I didn't immediately reassure her that everything would be fine, the desperation began. Emma started making promises she'd never kept before. She'd spend more time with me, she'd be more appreciative, she'd even come back to volunteering at the community kitchen. But these weren't genuine expressions of remorse or understanding. They were bargaining chips offered by someone who finally understood that I held all the power she'd been so eager to access. The most revealing moment came when Emma suggested that maybe this whole experience had been a good lesson for her, and now that she'd learned it, surely we could move forward. She actually had the audacity to suggest that I'd orchestrated everything as some kind of elaborate teaching moment, and now that the lesson was complete, I should restore her scholarship and fix her friends' families' financial problems. But Emma had fundamentally misunderstood the situation. This wasn't a lesson with a neat resolution where good behavior would be rewarded with forgiveness. This was the natural consequence of years of choices she'd made, values she'd abandoned, and relationships she'd destroyed through her own actions. Her friends' families' financial collapses weren't punishments I'd orchestrated. They were revelations of existing problems that my business decisions had simply exposed. Madison's family had been living beyond their means for years, using credit and loans to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. Jessica's father's law practice had been struggling long before I terminated their lease. They'd been behind on rent for months. What I'd done was remove the artificial supports that had been propping up their unsustainable lifestyles, much like Emma had removed the emotional supports from our relationship through her cruelty and ingratitude. The difference was that I had the power to withdraw my support, while Emma had simply assumed that my love and generosity would continue regardless of how she treated me. The most painful part of watching Emma's world crumble was seeing how quickly her sophisticated friends abandoned her once their own families were in crisis. The girls who had laughed at my apron and recorded videos of Emma's cruel comments suddenly had no time for someone whose grandmother couldn't help solve their problems. Emma found herself as isolated as she'd made me feel, but without the inner strength that comes from years of genuine relationships and meaningful work. As summer progressed and Emma's Harvard dreams officially died, I watched her cycle through anger, bargaining, and finally a kind of bitter acceptance. She got a job at a local restaurant, not because I refused to support her, but because she was too proud to ask for help from the woman she'd spent years demeaning. She enrolled in community college, telling people it was a gap year while she figured out her next steps. But the most important realization came when I saw Emma at the community kitchen one evening. Not volunteering, she wasn't ready for that kind of genuine service yet, but eating there. She'd been too proud to come home for dinner, too stubborn to admit she needed help, and too broke to afford restaurant meals on her server's salary. I watched from across the room as the volunteers, people she'd once looked down on, served her with the same kindness and dignity they showed everyone. I saw her face as she realized that these simple people doing embarrassing work were treating her with more respect and compassion than her wealthy friends had ever shown anyone. That night, Emma came home and found me in the kitchen, just as I'd been thousands of nights before when she was growing up. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with words she'd never learned how to say. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. And for the first time in years, I heard the voice of the little girl I'd raised, not the entitled young woman she'd become. But some apologies come too late, and some damage can't be undone with words alone. Emma was sorry. Sorry she'd lost her scholarship. Sorry her friends had abandoned her. Sorry her carefully constructed future had crumbled. But I wasn't sure she was truly sorry for the pain she'd caused me, or that she really understood the values she'd abandoned in her pursuit of social status. A year has passed since that graduation day that changed everything, and I find myself in a place I never expected to be. Not bitter, not broken, but strangely at peace with the choices I made and the lessons we both learned. Emma and I have found a new equilibrium, built not on the unconditional love I once offered, but on mutual respect and hard-earned understanding. Emma never did go to Harvard. Instead, she spent that gap year working, first at the restaurant, then at a nonprofit organization that helps families facing foreclosure, families much like her friends had become. The work was humbling in ways that her privileged upbringing never had been, and I watched her slowly begin to understand the value of service, the dignity of honest work, and the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their circumstances. She applied to state universities for the following year, writing essays about resilience, family, and the dangers of taking love for granted. She earned her way in through her own merit, without my financial influence or connections, and I was prouder of that acceptance letter than I'd ever been of her Harvard scholarship. Our relationship now is different than it was before, more honest, perhaps, but also more fragile. Emma understands now that my love isn't unconditional, that respect must be earned and maintained, and that actions have consequences that can't always be undone. I've learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is allowing them to face the full weight of their choices. The community kitchen remains central to my life, but now Emma volunteers there too, not because I require it, but because she's discovered the satisfaction that comes from genuine service. She's good with the children who come in with their families, patient and kind in ways that remind me of the little girl I once knew. Sometimes I catch her looking at me while we work side by side, and I see something in her eyes that wasn't there before. Not just love, but respect. My business empire continues to thrive, managed now by a team of professionals who understand my values and priorities. The Thornfield Foundation has grown into one of the region's most significant charitable organizations, providing scholarships to deserving students who demonstrate both academic excellence and genuine character. Emma knows she'll never be eligible for those scholarships, but she's begun volunteering with the selection committee, helping identify young people who embody the values she once abandoned. The properties I own throughout the region now serve a different purpose than they once did. Instead of being simply investments, they've become tools for community development and social justice. I've converted several buildings into affordable housing for working families, transformed others into community centers and educational facilities. The shopping center where Emma once spent her weekends with her entitled friends now houses a job training center and a free medical clinic. Madison's family eventually recovered from their financial collapse, but it took years of hard work and genuine humility. Madison herself reached out to Emma last month, apologizing for the role she'd played in encouraging Emma's worst impulses. She's working as a teacher now, having discovered that she finds more satisfaction in helping children learn than she ever did in maintaining social status. Jessica's father rebuilt his law practice with a focus on helping families facing foreclosure and financial crisis, families much like his own had been. The experience of losing everything taught him empathy he'd never possessed before, and his new practice, while smaller, serves a purpose that his old one never had. As for Emma, she's become someone I'm learning to be proud of again, but in a different way than before. She's not the perfect granddaughter I once thought I was raising, but she's becoming a woman of substance, someone who understands that true worth comes from character rather than circumstances, from service rather than status. We still live in the same modest house, but Emma no longer sees it as something to be ashamed of. She's learned that home isn't about impressing others. It's about the love and respect that exist within its walls. She's dating a young man she met at the nonprofit where she works, someone who values her for her kindness and work ethic rather than her social connections or family wealth. Sometimes, late at night, when we're both in the kitchen, she doing homework, me reviewing foundation business, she'll look up and say, "Thank you, Grandma. Not for the money or the opportunities I could provide, but for the lessons she needed to learn, even when they came at such a high cost." I've learned something too. In this year of rebuilding our relationship, love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's enabling. The greatest gift I gave Emma wasn't the scholarship or the privileged upbringing or the financial security. It was teaching her that actions have consequences, that respect must be earned, and that true strength comes from facing the results of your choices with dignity and grace. My legacy now isn't just the business empire I built or the wealth I accumulated. It's the foundation that will continue helping deserving young people long after I'm gone. The community programs that will serve families for generations, and most importantly, the granddaughter who learned that real worth comes from who you are, not what you have or who you know. Emma will inherit something from me eventually, but it won't be what she once expected. She'll inherit the responsibility of continuing the foundation's work, the obligation to serve others, and the knowledge that with great privilege comes great responsibility. She'll inherit not just wealth, but the wisdom to use it well. And perhaps most importantly, she'll inherit the understanding that love, real love, isn't about giving people everything they want. Sometimes it's about giving them exactly what they need, even when it breaks your heart to do it. The woman in the apron who was once a source of shame has become someone Emma introduces with pride. "This is my grandmother," she says now when we're at community events together. "She's the strongest person I know." It took losing everything she thought she wanted for Emma to understand what she'd always had, and it took breaking my own heart to save hers. But we're both stronger now, both wiser, and both grateful for the hard lessons that brought us to this place of genuine respect and earned love. That's a legacy worth leaving behind.